The massive space station hung in the darkness above Centauri Prime, like a metal moon. Inside its gleaming corridors, the most powerful beings in the galaxy had gathered for what they thought would be a routine meeting. The air buzzed with excitement and cruel anticipation. Admiral Kresh of the Vorthak Empire stood nearly 8 feet tall, his reptilian scales gleaming under the artificial lights. His yellow eyes burned with hunger as he stared at the holographic display floating in the center of the council chamber. There, spinning slowly in perfect detail, was a small blue and green planet called Earth. "Look at this pathetic world," Kresh hissed, his forked tongue flicking out as he spoke. "These humans think they can resist us with their primitive rockets and metal ships." Around the circular chamber, representatives from the 7 most powerful species in the galaxy nodded in agreement. The Zephyrians, beings made of living crystal, chimed like wind bells as they laughed. Their leader, a towering figure whose body caught and reflected light in rainbow patterns, spoke in a voice like breaking glass. "Our scouts report they barely have weapons that work in space," the crystal being said. "They use chemical explosions to move their ships." How adorable. The insectoid delegates from the Hive Collective clicked their mandibles in amusement. Their queen speaker, a creature the size of a small shuttle with compound eyes that gleamed like black diamonds, added her own thoughts. "The hive minds have analyzed their technology," she buzzed through her translator. "They are perhaps 50,000 years behind our weakest member species. This will not even qualify as a proper conquest." Admiral Kresh pulled up detailed reports from their recent scouting mission to the Sol system. The humans had actually tried to fight back when Vorthak ships had entered their space. It was almost cute, like watching insects attack a giant. Their largest warships were crude metal boxes that moved slower than a pleasure yacht. Their weapons had bounced harmlessly off Vorthak shields. 12 of their ships attacked our scout force. Kresh continued, his scales rippling with amusement. 12, and they used solid projectiles, actual chunks of metal fired from tubes. I have not seen such primitive tactics since we conquered the cave dwellers of Proxima 7. The other council members erupted in laughter. The ethereal collective, beings of pure energy contained in flowing robes, flickered with what passed for mirth among their kind. Even the stoic rock people of the granite worlds cracked what might have been smiles on their stone faces. But Kresh was not finished. He had been planning this moment for months, ever since the first reports of human civilization had reached the council. Earth sat in a perfect location along the trade routes, and its biosphere would make an excellent agricultural world once the current inhabitants were removed. "I propose we send the first wave immediately," he announced. 50 ships should be more than sufficient to break their spirit. Once they see our true power, they will surrender without further resistance. Then we can begin the cleansing protocols, the E. Council voted unanimously. Why waste time with these backward creatures? The sooner they dealt with the human problem, the sooner they could claim their new world and add its resources to the Empire. None of them noticed the tiny surveillance device hidden in the chamber's walls, no bigger than a dust speck. And none of them suspected that every word they spoke was being transmitted across impossible distances to a small blue planet, where beings far more dangerous than they could imagine were listening to every threat, every casual mention of genocide, every arrogant assumption about human weakness. The trap was already set. The council just did not know they had walked into it. 3 miles beneath the bustling streets of Seoul, Commander Jin stood in a room that officially did not exist. The underground facility stretched for kilometers in every direction, hidden, so deep that even the most advanced alien sensors would miss it completely. Holographic displays covered every wall, showing the incoming Vorthak fleet as 50 massive warships crossed into Earth's solar system. Jin was a compact man in his 40s, with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much. He had been preparing for this moment his entire adult life, just like his father before him, and his grandfather before that. For 3 generations his family had known this day would come. "Sir, they're exactly where we expected them to be," Lieutenant Hannah reported. From her station, she was young, barely 25, but her fingers danced across the control panels with the skill of someone who had trained since childhood. "The alien fleet is holding position just outside Mars orbit, probably waiting for us to make the first move." Jin nodded slowly. Everything was going according to plan. The Vorthak ships were impressive by galactic standards, each one the size of a small city, bristling with energy weapons that could level mountains. Their shields shimmered with power that could deflect anything humanity was supposed to possess. Time to give them what they expect to see, Jin said quietly. Activate the theater fleet. Hana's hands moved across her controls, and somewhere far above them, 12 ancient-looking spacecraft began to emerge from behind Earth's moon. To any observer, they looked like humanity's desperate last hope. Crude metal constructions held together with visible welds and external plating. Their engines glowed with the orange flame of chemical rockets, the kind of technology most galactic civilizations had abandoned thousands of years ago. The ships moved slowly, almost painfully, as they formed up in a defensive line between Earth and the approaching aliens. Their hulls were scarred and patched, giving them the appearance of vessels that had been hastily converted from cargo haulers and mining ships. Which, according to the false records the aliens had stolen, was exactly what they were. Broadcasting on all frequencies, Hana announced. We're demanding they leave our system immediately and threatening to defend ourselves if they don't. Jin almost smiled at that. The message was perfectly crafted to sound brave but desperate, the kind of last stand that primitive civilizations always attempted before their inevitable defeat. The aliens would hear defiance mixed with fear, exactly what they expected from a species that had barely learned to leave its home planet. On the main display, the alien fleet began to advance. Their formation was textbook perfect, designed to overwhelm and intimidate. Energy readings spiked as their weapons powered up, shields reinforced to maximum strength. Admiral Kresh was clearly planning to make this quick and brutal. The first shots came from the human ships, crude kinetic projectiles that looked like oversized bullets fired from magnetic rails. The rounds struck the alien shields and bounced off harmlessly, creating pretty light shows, but doing no real damage. It was the kind of pathetic display the aliens expected from a primitive species trying to fight above its weight class. Direct hit on the soul's pride, Hana reported as alien energy beams lanced out in response. One of the human ships shuddered under the impact, its hull glowing cherry red from the heat. She's taking heavy damage, but holding together, too. More human vessels were hit in rapid succession. The Busan Defender lost its engines in a spectacular explosion, drifting helplessly as its chemical fuel ignited. The Incheon Guardian simply vanished in a ball of superheated plasma, vaporized by a direct hit from the alien flagship. Jin watched the destruction with no emotion on his face. Those ships had been empty, controlled remotely from this very bunker. But to the aliens, it would look like desperate humans dying for their world. They're demanding our surrender now, Hana said, translating the alien transmission. Admiral Kresh wants to speak with our planetary leaders immediately. Let them wait, Jin replied. We need to sell this performance for a few more minutes. Above them, the remaining 9 human ships continued their brave but futile resistance, firing their primitive weapons and slowly retreating toward Earth. It was exactly the kind of heroic last stand that would make the aliens overconfident. And overconfidence, Jin knew, was exactly what would kill them. Admiral Kresh leaned back in his command chair, watching the pathetic human ships retreat toward their home planet. 3 of their vessels were already destroyed, and the remaining 9 were clearly running out of options. Their primitive weapons had barely scratched his shields, and their chemical rockets were so slow, his gunners were having trouble missing them. Prepare boarding pods, he ordered with satisfaction. I want to capture their leaders alive. The Council will want to interrogate them before we begin the cleansing. His tactical officer, a younger Vorthak with bright green scales, hissed his agreement. Sir, should we target their engines? We could disable them without destroying the ships entirely. No need, Kresh replied, his yellow eyes fixed on the main display. Look at them. They are already beaten. They know it. We know it. And soon the entire galaxy will know that humanity tried to resist the inevitable and failed miserably. The human ships had formed a loose defensive circle around Earth, their battered hulls facing outward like ancient warriors making their last stand. It was almost honorable in a primitive sort of way. Kresh had seen this same pattern hundreds of times before. Desperate species fighting with everything they had, never realizing how outmatched they truly were. "All ships advance to final attack position," he commanded. "Prepare to broadcast surrender demands on all human frequencies. Give them one last chance to save themselves." But as his 50 warships moved in for the kill, something impossible happened. The human ship directly in front of the Vorthak flagship suddenly flickered like a bad hologram. For just a moment it seemed to exist in two places at once. Then, without any visible effort, it passed straight through a massive piece of space debris that should have torn it apart. "What was that?" Kresh demanded, his scales rippling with confusion. "Did their ship just—" He never finished the question. The same human vessel that had been limping along on chemical rockets suddenly accelerated to impossible speeds. But this was not the acceleration of engines. It was as if space itself was folding around the ship, pulling it forward faster than physics should allow. Then the weapons fired. What emerged from the human ship was not the crude kinetic projectiles they had been using moments before. Instead, a beam of pure silver light lanced out and struck the Vorthak heavy cruiser Shadow of Victory. The massive warship, protected by shields that could withstand nuclear explosions, simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized. It was as if reality had decided the ship had never been there in the first place. "Impossible!" Kresh roared, but even as he spoke, more human ships were revealing their true nature. The battered, primitive-looking hulls flickered and changed, showing glimpses of technology that hurt to look at directly. Sleek forms that seemed to bend light around themselves, surfaces that reflected colors that had no names. Another beam lanced out. This one a deep purple that seemed to pull light into itself. The target, a Vorthak destroyer, began to age rapidly. Its hull corroded in seconds, its crew withering to dust as time itself was weaponized against them. The ship crumbled into cosmic debris before anyone could even scream. "Shields to maximum!" Kresh screamed, but his orders came too late. The human ships were moving now, not through space, but through dimensions his species had never even dreamed of. They appeared above his fleet, below it, sometimes occupying the same space as his own vessels without any collision occurring. The weapons they deployed defied every law of physics Kresh knew. One human ship fired what looked like a small star, and everything it touched was converted into pure energy. Another seemed to shoot holes in reality itself, black tears in space that swallowed Vorthak ships whole and sealed themselves behind them. "Sir, we've lost contact with 17 ships," his communications officer reported, terror clear in his voice. "No, wait, 23. Sir, they're not just destroying us, they're erasing us." Kresh watched in growing horror as his proud fleet was torn apart by technology that treated the fundamental forces of the universe like toys. These were not the primitive humans his scouts had reported. These were beings who had mastered science so advanced it looked like magic. "Retreat," he finally managed to shout. "All ships, emergency jump to hyperspace. Abandon formation and run." Of his 50 ships, only 3 managed to escape. The rest were gone, deleted from existence by weapons that operated on principles the Galactic Council had never encountered. As his battered flagship limped away from the Sol system, Kresh realized with cold certainty that everything they thought they knew about humanity was a lie. The humans had been playing with them, and now the real war was about to begin. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been going for 18 hours straight, and the tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a blade. Admiral Kresh stood in the center of the room, his reptilian form trembling with rage and humiliation. His uniform was torn, his scales dulled from exhaustion, and one of his arms hung in a medical sling from his escape from the Sol system. 50 ships, he repeated for the 100th time, his voice hoarse with disbelief. 50 of our finest warships, gone in less than 20 minutes, not destroyed, erased, as if they never existed at all. The other council members listened with growing alarm. The crystal-bodied Zephyrian leader's normally perfect harmonic voice crackled with static as she spoke. "You claim these humans possess technology beyond our understanding. But our intelligence reports showed primitive chemical, rockets and metal projectiles. That was what they wanted us to see." Kresh slammed his good fist against the speaking platform. It was all fake, all of it. Their ships moved through solid matter like it was empty space. Their weapons turned time itself into a weapon. I watched the destroyer Bone Crusher age 1,000 years in 10 seconds. The Queen Speaker of the Hive Collective clicked her mandibles nervously. Her compound eyes reflected the holographic displays, showing the empty space where Kresh's fleet had been destroyed. The hive minds have analyzed the battle recordings. The energy signatures make no sense. These weapons operate on principles we have never encountered. Around the chamber, representatives from smaller member species whispered among themselves. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had ruled through fear and overwhelming force. No species had ever successfully resisted them, let alone humiliated them so completely. The leader of the ethereal collective, a being of pure energy barely contained within flowing robes, spoke in a voice like distant thunder. If these humans possess such technology, why did they hide it? Why appear weak when they were clearly strong? Because they were studying us, Kresh realized, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. They let us attack first so they could see what we were capable of. They were gathering intelligence while we thought we were gathering theirs. The chamber erupted in angry voices as the implications sank in. If humanity had been watching them, learning about them, preparing for war while pretending to be helpless, then everything the Council thought they knew was wrong. The Granite World representative, a being that looked like a walking mountain, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "What do you propose, Admiral? That we abandon our expansion into human space?" "No," Kresh's roar silenced the chamber. "I propose we show these humans what real power looks like. They defeated 50 ships with trickery and advanced technology. Let them try to trick 10,000. The Queen Speaker's antennae twitched with interest. "You want to mobilize the Grand Fleet?" "I want to mobilize everything," Kresh declared. "Every ship, every warrior, every weapon in Council space. The humans think they have seen our strength. They have seen nothing. We will gather such a force that even their impossible technology cannot stand against it," the Zephyrian leader chimed, like breaking glass. "The largest military force in galactic history. The logistics alone would be staggering." "Then stagger," Kresh snarled. "I want dreadnoughts from every Vorthak world. I want the Hive's bioships, swarms so thick they blot out the stars. I want Zephyrian crystal vessels that can shatter planets. I want the ethereal war forms and granite siege platforms. I want them to look at our fleet and despair." Over the following weeks, the greatest military mobilization in galactic history began. From the core worlds to the outer rim, warships of every description converged on staging areas near human space. Massive Vorthak dreadnoughts, each one capable of destroying a moon, formed the backbone of the fleet. Zephyrian crystal ships sang with deadly harmonics that could shatter matter at the molecular level. The Hive Collective contributed millions of biomechanical vessels, living ships that could repair themselves and reproduce in battle. Ethereal warforms, beings of pure energy shaped into weapons of mass destruction, took their positions alongside Granite World siege platforms that could crack continents. Species that had remained neutral for centuries pledged their fleets rather than risk being seen as sympathetic to the humans. Old enemies put aside their differences to contribute to the armada. The Burning Ones brought ships that could ignite entire atmospheres. The Void-touched added vessels that could phase through normal matter. When the counting was finally done, over 10,000 ships of war had gathered at the edge of human space. The combined fleet stretched across light years, a constellation of death that represented the military might of half the galaxy. Billions of alien warriors prepared for what would surely be the final battle. Admiral Kresh stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the inevitable victory, and broadcast humanity's death sentence across all frequencies. "People of Earth, you face the combined might of the Galactic Council. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Resist and we will make your world a monument to the price of defying us." But deep in his scaled heart, Kresh wondered if even this vast armada would be enough. The secret meeting room beneath the Swiss Alps had been carved from solid rock 300 years ago, its existence known to fewer than 50 people on Earth. Today those 50 people represented every major nation and held humanity's most closely guarded secrets. Commander Jin stood at the head of the ancient oak table, his face grave as he prepared to reveal truths that would reshape everything. The assembled leaders thought they knew about their own species. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jin began, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was about to say, "what I'm going to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true, and our survival depends on you understanding it completely." The president of the European Federation leaned forward, her weathered face creased with concern. "Commander, we've seen the reports from your battle with the alien fleet. Whatever technology you used out there, it's clearly far beyond anything we thought humanity possessed." Jin nodded slowly. "That's because for 3 centuries we've been living a lie. Everything you think you know about human technological development, our struggles with space travel, our limitations, all of it has been carefully constructed theater." Dr. Huan stepped forward from the shadows at the back of the room. He was an elderly man with kind eyes that held secrets deeper than oceans. As head of the Hidden Sciences Division, he had spent his entire life maintaining humanity's greatest deception. In 1823, Dr. Huan began, a mining accident in the mountains of Tibet uncovered something that should not have existed, a chamber, clearly artificial, containing technology that was millions of years old. We now know it was left by a previous civilization that once ruled this galaxy before they transcended physical existence entirely. The room was dead silent. The Prime Minister of the Pacific Alliance, a woman known for her skepticism, stared at Dr. Huan with disbelief. "You're telling us we found alien technology 200 years ago?" "Not just found it," Dr. Huan continued. "We learned from it. Within 50 years, our brightest minds had unlocked secrets that should have taken us millennia to discover. Faster than light? Travel, matter manipulation, dimensional engineering. We mastered it all while the world above continued using steam engines." Jin activated a holographic display that showed the true extent of human space presence. Instead of the handful of primitive stations the public knew about, the display revealed thousands of hidden facilities spread across dozens of star systems, massive shipyards orbiting distant suns, research stations that existed in folded space, weapons platforms that could crack planets. "We realized early on that revealing this technology would be catastrophic," Jin explained. "If humanity had suddenly leaped from horses to starships overnight, it would have torn our civilization apart. Wars would have consumed us as nations fought over the technology. So we created the Veil Protocol, a plan to develop our real capabilities, in secret while maintaining the illusion of normal technological progress." The Minister of the Indian Confederation raised a shaking hand. "But why hide it from us, from the elected leaders of humanity?" "Because," a new voice said from the corner of the room, "the galaxy is far more dangerous than any of you imagined." Agent G stepped into the light, her appearance causing several leaders to gasp in recognition. They knew her as Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a respected xenobiology professor who had written books about the possibility of alien life. What they didn't know was that she had spent the last 15 years living deep undercover within the Vorthak Empire itself. "I've been inside their civilization," G continued, her voice heavy with the weight of terrible knowledge. "I've seen what they do to species they consider inferior. Entire worlds turned into slave farms, populations bred like livestock, children taken from their families and conditioned into mindless soldiers." She activated another display, this one showing recorded footage from Vorthak territory. The images were horrific. Cities burning, families torn apart, entire species ground down into servitude. Several of the world leaders turned away, unable to watch. "The Zephyrians crystallize living beings for art," G went on relentlessly. "The Hive Collective performs experiments on sentient species to improve their biotechnology. The Granite Worlds crush civilizations simply because they enjoy the sound. These are not conquerors seeking territory. They are monsters who view suffering as entertainment." Commander Jin stepped forward again. "We've had agents embedded in every major galactic civilization for over a century. We know their military capabilities, their political structures, their deepest fears and weaknesses. We've been preparing for the day when they would discover us and try to do to humanity what they've done to thousands of other species." Dr. Huan pulled up a final display showing humanity's true military strength. ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, weapons that could rewrite the laws of physics, defensive systems that treated entire star systems as fortified positions. "We didn't just prepare to defend ourselves," he said quietly. "We prepared to end their reign of terror forever. The galaxy has been ruled by tyrants for too long. Innocent species have suffered under their boot for millennia. But that ends now." The room erupted in stunned questions, but Jin held up his hand for silence. "The Council is mobilizing everything they have. 10,000 ships, maybe more. They think they're coming to crush a primitive species that got lucky. Instead, they're walking into a trap that's been 300 years in the making." He looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders, seeing fear and wonder and hope warring in their expressions. "The age of galactic tyranny is over," he said simply, "and humanity is going to be the one to end it." The edge of the Sol system had never seen anything like it. 10,000 warships stretched across space in a formation so vast it could be seen from neighboring star systems. The Galactic Council's armada hung in the darkness like a constellation of death, each vessel bristling with enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. Admiral Kresh stood on the bridge of his flagship, the inevitable Victory, gazing out at the greatest military force ever assembled. Massive Vorthak dreadnoughts formed the core of the fleet, their hulls black as midnight and twice the size of city blocks. Around them swarmed countless smaller vessels, Zephyrian crystal ships that sang with deadly harmonics, hive bioships that pulsed with organic menace, and ethereal warforms that existed as pure energy barely contained in metallic shells. "Final count, Admiral," his tactical officer reported with obvious satisfaction. 10,237 ships of war, crews totaling over 50 million warriors, firepower sufficient to crack a planet's crust. Kresh's scaled, lips pulled back in what passed for a smile among his species. "And opposing us, 12 primitive ships that we already know are more than they appear. But even if each human vessel could destroy 100 of ours, the mathematics are clear." Opened a communication channel that reached every ship in the armada. "Warriors of the Council, today we make history. Today we show the galaxy what happens to those who dare resist our will. The humans revealed trickery and deception in our last encounter, but tricks cannot stand against overwhelming force. Across the fleet, billions of alien warriors prepared for battle, weapons that could boil oceans charged to full power, shields that could deflect nuclear explosions hummed with energy. The combined technological might of 7 major civilizations focused on one small star system and the blue world that dared to defy them. "Begin the advance," Kresh commanded. "Standard formation, let them see their doom approaching." The armada began to move, a wall of destruction thousands of kilometers wide. Their engines lit up the darkness as they crossed into the outer reaches of human space, passing the orbit of Neptune with casual arrogance. Sensor sweeps detected nothing unusual, just empty space, a few asteroids, and the distant sun that warmed the world they had come to claim. But Commander Jin, watching from his hidden command center deep beneath Earth, was smiling. "Range?" he asked Lieutenant Hanna, who was monitoring the approaching fleet with instruments the aliens couldn't even detect. "Outer perimeter reached, sir," she reported. "They're right where we want them." Jin's finger hovered over a control that looked deceptively simple, just a red button marked with symbols that had never appeared in any human language. "Begin decloak sequence. Show them what they're really facing." What happened next defied everything the alien fleet thought they knew about human capabilities. Space itself seemed to shimmer and bend as thousands of objects materialized out of nothingness. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands upon thousands of human defensive platforms that had been hidden throughout the solar system. They appeared everywhere at once. Massive battle stations the size of small moons emerged from behind every planet and major asteroid. Weapon platforms materialized along the paths between worlds, creating overlapping fields of fire that covered every possible approach to Earth. Defensive grids activated around Jupiter, using the gas giant's massive gravity well to power weapons that hurt to look at directly. "Impossible!" Kresh roared as his sensors went wild, trying to count the newly revealed threats. Where did they all come from? But the surprises were far from over. The space around the human defensive network began to ripple like water, and from those ripples emerged humanity's true fleet. These were not the crude metal ships the aliens had faced before, but vessels that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their hulls reflected light that had no name, and their very presence caused space-time to bend in ways that made alien sensors scream warnings. Commander Jin's voice echoed across every communication frequency, reaching every ship in the Galactic Armada. You came here believing you faced a primitive species armed with chemical rockets and metal bullets. You were wrong. You came here thinking you could do to humanity what you've done to countless innocent civilizations across the galaxy. You were wrong about that too. The human fleet continued to emerge from folded space, sleek vessels that moved like living things, massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the largest Vorthak ships, and smaller craft that seemed to phase in and out of reality itself. Each one was armed with technology that treated the fundamental forces of the universe as tools to be shaped and wielded. For 300 years we have watched you, Jin continued, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. We have seen your crimes, catalogued your cruelties, and prepared for this moment. You rule through fear and call it strength. You destroy because you can and call it order. But your time is over. Admiral Kresh stared at the displays showing impossible numbers of human ships and weapons. His mighty armada, which had seemed so overwhelming minutes before, now looked small and vulnerable against the true might of humanity revealed. Today, Commander Jin's voice concluded, the galaxy learns what happens when you threaten the innocent. Today you face not just human technology, but human justice, and we have been saving up 3 centuries worth of justice for you. The battle for the future of the galaxy was about to begin, and the aliens were finally beginning to understand that they were not the hunters in this encounter. They were the prey. The first shots of what would become known as the Liberation War were fired at exactly 1427 Earth Standard Time, and they came not from the massive alien armada, but from humanity's hidden defenders. What followed was not a battle in any traditional sense. It was a systematic dismantling of everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about warfare. Admiral Kresh barely had time to shout, "Fire all weapons," before reality itself seemed to turn against his fleet. The human ships didn't move through space like normal vessels. They folded space around themselves, appearing instantly wherever they chose to be. One moment a human destroyer was facing off against a Vorthak dreadnought at extreme range. The next moment, it was inside the alien ship's shields, firing weapons that rewrote matter at the atomic level. The Zephyrian crystal ships tried to use their harmonic weapons, frequencies that could shatter planets by finding the resonance of their molecular structure. But when they fired at the human vessels, the sound waves simply passed through them, as if they weren't there. Then the humans fired back with weapons that turned the crystal beings' own harmonics against them, causing their ships to sing themselves, apart in cascading failures of crystalline structure. "Shields are useless," screamed the tactical officer aboard Kresh's flagship, as human weapons passed through their defensive barriers like they were made of air. "Sir, they're not even trying to break through our shields. They're ignoring them." Completely. Kresh watched in growing horror as his mighty fleet was carved apart with surgical precision. A human cruiser appeared directly above a hive bioship and fired what looked like liquid starlight. The organic vessel began to age rapidly, its living hull withering and dying as time itself was weaponized. Within seconds, a ship that had been alive for centuries crumbled into space dust, but the worst part was how methodical it all was. The humans weren't fighting with rage or desperation. They were executing a plan that had clearly been prepared down to the smallest detail. Every attack was calculated, every movement precise. They knew exactly where each alien ship would be before it got there. "They're not just reading our tactical patterns," gasped the communications officer, her scaled hands shaking as she tried to maintain contact with the fleet. "Sir, they know our patterns better than we do. It's like they've been studying us for centuries." Kresh finished grimly, the truth finally hitting him. "They've been watching us for centuries." A human battleship materialized directly in front of the inevitable victory, so close that Kresh could see strange symbols glowing along its hull. The ship was beautiful in a terrifying way, its surface seeming to exist in more dimensions than the eye could process. When it fired, the weapon that emerged was pure impossibility, a beam of concentrated nothingness that didn't destroy so much as convince reality that the target had never existed. The forward section of Kresh's flagship simply vanished, along with 3,000 of his crew. No explosion, no debris, no trace that they had ever been there at all. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut as the ship's atmosphere screamed out into the void, but Kresh knew it was over. His mighty vessel was dying around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But even as the battle raged in the Sol system, something far more significant was happening across the galaxy. Human strike forces, previously hidden and undetected, began appearing simultaneously at hundreds of strategic locations throughout Council space. On the Vorthak homeworld of Krul, massive human warships emerged from dimensional rifts directly above the planet's slave processing centers. These were the facilities where captured beings from conquered worlds were broken down into compliance, their spirits crushed and their children stolen. The human ships didn't target civilian areas or cities. Their weapons were focused with laser precision on the infrastructure of oppression. The main processing facility, a sprawling complex that covered an entire continent, was hit by weapons that simply turned off the molecular bonds holding it together. The entire structure collapsed into component atoms, freeing millions of enslaved beings, while leaving the surrounding areas completely untouched. In Zephyrian space, their crystal cities that had stood for millennia began to sing funeral songs as human forces appeared above them. But again, the humans struck only military targets and the facilities where other species were held captive. The beautiful crystal spires where Zephyrian civilians lived remained untouched, while their war factories and torture chambers were reduced to harmless sand. The Hive Collective's bio-research stations, where they performed horrific experiments on captured sentients to improve their own technology, found themselves facing human ships that turned their own bioweapons against them. Living walls that had tortured countless victims for centuries suddenly turned on their creators, while the test subjects were carefully evacuated by human rescue teams. Back in the Sol system, Admiral Kresh felt his flagship shudder as another section was erased from existence. Through the static-filled communications, he could hear the death screams of his fleet, thousands of ships being systematically destroyed by an enemy that fought like gods. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, his voice broken with despair, "we've lost 90% of the fleet. Should we surrender?" Kresh looked out at the wreckage of his dreams of conquest, watching human ships move through the debris like sharks through bloody water. In the distance, Earth hung blue and beautiful and utterly untouchable, protected by forces that made his greatest weapons look like children's toys. "There's no one left to surrender to," he said quietly. "They're not taking prisoners, they're making an example." As if to prove his point, a human ship appeared directly outside the bridge windows. For a moment, Kresh stared into lights that might have been windows or might have been stars, wondering if there were human eyes looking back at him. Then the light grew brighter, reality folded in on itself, and Admiral Kresh learned what it felt like to be erased from the universe. Across the galaxy, the age of the Galactic Council was ending, and humanity had only just begun to show their true power. Agent Mi-sun stood in the command center of the human liberation ship, Hope's Dawn, watching dozens of holographic displays that showed simultaneous operations across half the galaxy. For 15 years, she had lived among the Vorthak as Dr. Yuki Tanaka, documenting their cruelties, while secretly coordinating a network of human operatives embedded throughout Council space. Now, finally, she could drop the disguise and begin the work she had spent her entire adult life preparing for. "Status report from the Andrala system," called out Lieutenant Cho from his station. "Local Vorthak garrison has surrendered without firing a shot. The slave facilities are secure, and we're beginning evacuation procedures for approximately 2 million captives." Mi-sun nodded, checking another display that showed the faces of beings who hadn't seen freedom in generations. The Andralans were a peaceful species of blue-skinned humanoids who had been conquered 50 years ago. Their children had been taken to Vorthak military academies to be trained as soldiers. while the adults were forced to work in mining operations that slowly poisoned their homeworld. "How are the children responding to liberation?" Misun asked, knowing this would be the hardest part. Many of the young Andralans had never known anything but Vorthak conditioning. "Better than expected," Cho replied with a smile. Apparently, some of the older ones remembered stories their grandparents told them about the time before the conquest. They're helping to calm the younger ones and explaining that the humans are here to help. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on hundreds of worlds. Human strike forces, operating with precision that came from decades of careful planning, were systematically dismantling the infrastructure that had kept entire species in chains. But this wasn't random destruction. Every target had been carefully selected to maximize freedom while minimizing harm to innocent civilians. On the Vorthak capital world of Krul, something unprecedented was happening. For 1,000 years, the planet had been considered the most heavily defended location in the galaxy. Orbital defense platforms surrounded it like a metal shell, each one capable of destroying incoming fleets. Energy shields that could deflect. Asteroid impacts wrapped the world in layers of protection. The Vorthak had boasted that their homeworld was truly impregnable. They were wrong. Human ships emerged from dimensional space directly inside the defensive perimeter, appearing in the gaps between shield layers like ghosts materializing from thin air. The weapons they deployed were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Quantum disruptors that convinced matter it didn't want to exist anymore. Temporal accelerators that aged metal and circuitry until it crumbled to dust. The mighty orbital platforms, each one the size of a small city, simply fell apart as their molecular bonds were selectively dissolved. No explosions, no debris raining down on the planet below. The structures just quietly decomposed into their component atoms and drifted away as harmless space dust. But the real shock came when the human ships began broadcasting directly to the population below. The transmissions bypassed all government censorship, reaching every communication device on the planet simultaneously. "People of Krul," the message began in perfect Vorthak language. "We are humanity, and we bring you a choice. Your government has ruled through fear and oppression for too long. We offer you the chance to build something better." Meanwhile, in the biochambers of the Hive Collective's core worlds, something even more dramatic was occurring. The Queens, massive creatures whose neural networks controlled billions of drones across dozens of star systems, suddenly found themselves experiencing something they had never felt before: direct mental contact from outside their species. The message that burned itself into their consciousness came with the full weight of human telepathic technology, carrying not just words, but emotions, images, and undeniable truth. "We have watched you," the mental voice said, accompanied by perfect recordings of every atrocity the Hive had committed over the centuries. "We have seen you tear families apart for your experiments. We have recorded you breeding sentient beings like livestock. We have catalogued every scream, every tear, every life you have destroyed in the name of progress." The Queens tried to block the transmission, but human technology reached deeper than their defenses could go. The message continued relentlessly, showing them their crimes through the eyes of their victims, forcing them to experience the pain they had caused. "Your time as rulers is over," the voice concluded. "You will release every captive species under your control, or you will face the same fate as your war fleets." Across the galaxy, species that had been crushed under council rule for millennia watched in amazement as their oppressors' mighty fleets turned to cosmic dust. The Bellari, a race of small, furry beings who had been used as living test subjects for weapons development, emerged from their hidden shelters to see Vorthak ships burning in their sky. The crystalline, shimmering ones, whose homeworld had been strip-mined for rare minerals, watched Zephyrian extraction platforms collapse into glittering fragments. On world after world, the same scene played out. Beings who had lived their entire lives in fear stepping into sunlight for the first time. Children who had never known freedom, learning what it meant to play without terror. Families reunited after decades of forced separation. Misun watched the reports flowing in from across known space, each one a story of liberation, of hope restored, of justice finally delivered to those who had suffered for so long. The network of human agents she had spent years building was coordinating the largest rescue operation in galactic history, and so far, it was working perfectly. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Cho called out, his voice filled with wonder, "we're getting reports from the Outer Rim territories. Species we didn't even know existed are coming out of hiding. Apparently, some civilizations have been in hiding for centuries, waiting for someone to challenge the Council's power." Mi-sun smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. After so many years of watching suffering and being unable to act, finally, the galaxy was learning what freedom felt like. "Signal all units," she ordered. "Phase 2 of Liberation Protocols is now in effect. It's time to start building something better." The assembly hall aboard the human flagship Terra Guardian was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, stretching. For kilometers in every direction, the vast chamber had been designed to accommodate beings of every imaginable size and environmental need. Crystalline entities floated in specialized gravity fields, while aquatic species swam in transparent tubes that wove through the air. Massive rock beings from heavy gravity worlds stood alongside delicate flower-like creatures that required precise atmospheric conditions to survive. Commander Jin stood at the center of it all, on a simple platform that somehow managed to be visible to every one of the 1,000+ species gathered before him. The technology that made this possible was far beyond what most civilizations could comprehend. Light bent to carry his image to every corner of the hall, while translation systems converted his words into languages that had never been heard by human ears. 3 months had passed since the fall of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy was still adjusting to a reality where tyranny no longer ruled supreme. Some species had embraced their newfound freedom immediately, while others struggled to understand what life could be like without oppression. But all of them had come here today to hear what humanity planned to do with the power they had so decisively demonstrated. "My friends," Jin began, his voice carrying clearly across the vast space, 3 months ago, many of you believed that freedom was impossible. You had lived under the boot of tyrants for so long that you had forgotten what it felt like to make your own choices, to speak without fear, to raise your children knowing they would not be taken from you. A ripple of emotion passed through the crowd. The Andralans, still bearing the scars of Vorthak slavery, clicked their mandibles in agreement. The shimmering ones, whose crystal forms had been dulled by generations of forced labor, began to glow with renewed inner light. Even the former subjects of the Hive Collective, still learning to think as individuals rather than drones, showed signs of recognition. "Some of you may wonder why humanity intervened," Jin continued. "Why we revealed ourselves and risked everything to challenge the Council's power. The answer is simple. Because we could not stand by and watch evil triumph when we had the power to stop it." He gestured to the holographic displays that surrounded the chamber, showing images of human history, the struggles against tyranny on Earth, the wars fought for freedom, the gradual evolution of human society toward justice and equality. "We are not perfect," Jin said honestly. "Our own history is filled with mistakes, with times when we failed to live up to our ideals. But we learned from those failures. We grew beyond them. And when we looked out at the galaxy and saw the same patterns of oppression we had once overcome, we knew we could not remain silent." The former Queen Speaker of the Hive Collective, her compound eyes reflecting the lights of the chamber, spoke through her translator. "What do you want from us humans? What is the price of this freedom you offer?" Jin's expression grew serious. "There is no price because freedom is not something that can be bought or sold. It is the right of every sentient being. But freedom comes with responsibility. The responsibility to ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else." He activated a new display, showing a schematic of what humanity proposed. Not an empire or a hierarchy, but a true confederation where every species, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, would have an equal voice in galactic affairs. "We propose a new galactic assembly," Jin explained. "Not a council of the strongest, but a gathering of equals. Every species will have representation based on their population and needs, not their military power. Decisions will be made through discussion and compromise, not threats and violence. A being that looked like a walking tree, representative of the verdant ones who had been hunted nearly to extinction for their life-giving sap, swayed gently as it spoke. And what of enforcement? What stops the strong from simply taking what they want, as they always have? Jin's smile was both gentle and absolutely terrifying. Humanity will serve as the galaxy's guardians. We have positioned monitoring stations throughout known space, staffed by volunteers from every willing species. Any attempt at conquest, any return to the old ways of oppression, will be met with immediate intervention. To demonstrate, he showed them glimpses of humanity's true capabilities, ships that could cross the galaxy in minutes, weapons that could rewrite the laws of physics, defensive systems that treated entire star clusters as fortified positions. The technology was so advanced it seemed like magic, yet it was all real, all functional, all pointed toward the protection of the innocent. "But we will not rule you," Jin emphasized, his voice carrying the weight of absolute sincerity. "We will guard you, protect you, stand between you and those who would harm you. But the choices you make about how to live your lives will always be yours alone." The assembly erupted in discussion as species that had been enemies for millennia began to talk about cooperation, about building something better than the galaxy had ever known. The former subjects of the granite worlds, beings of living stone who communicated through subsonic vibrations, began harmonizing with the musical chorus people in a song of hope that had never been heard before. Jin waited for the voices to quiet, then spoke his final words, words that would be remembered and repeated across the galaxy for generations to come. "The age of empires is over. The time of tyrants has ended. You are free now, all of you, and humanity pledges that you will remain free for as long as stars burn in the sky. We have waited 3 centuries for this moment, prepared for 3 centuries to be your guardians. That wait is over." He looked out at the faces, scaled, feathered, crystalline, gaseous, and everything in between, of beings who represented the hopes and dreams of trillions across the galaxy. "Welcome to the new age," he said simply. "Welcome to freedom." And in that moment, as cheers erupted in 1,000 different languages from 1,000 different species, the galaxy truly began to heal.